Ladies and gentlemen, before we get to what was said about President Trump, what Trudeau or Macron said, and before we get to, this is absolutely awesome, Trump abruptly cancels NATO news conference after summit turns sour. Well, too bad for them. We fund most of NATO. When President Obama was in the executive branch in the Oval Office, he stated that the 80s want their foreign policy back to Mitt Romney. And he came in with a Russian reset. So they don't really care. The Democratic Party, if it suited them, would jettison NATO. If it suited them. If NATO members hacked the DNC to inform the country that Bernie Sanders was cheated, thus giving Clinton the popular vote, while at the same time losing swing states for Clinton and Democrats and forcing Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign in disgrace, you better believe they would disparage NATO beyond belief. But the issue here is that this is a relic of the past. The Berlin Wall has fallen. Russia is not going to invade Poland or any country. Germany, they're not going to invade any country in Europe. A bordering nation, a former Soviet bloc nation, okay, that's perhaps, but not a country in Europe. And just read this, Reuters, fact box, France's on and off relationship with NATO. So they're hypocrites also. Just like President Obama, just like Democrats, when they're like, the Berlin Wall has already fallen, the 80s want their foreign policy back. Mitt Romney and McCain are the hawks against Russia. Why? We want to come in with a Russian reset. Oh, by the way, Uranium One's going to give money. And this is something that they will never, Trump should tweet that article every day. Uranium One officials gave money into the Clinton Foundation. President Obama could have vetoed the sale of 20% of U.S. uranium capacity. They still haven't explained why President Obama didn't veto the sale. That's something that Snopes and it's just a transaction. It was just a commodity. No, it's not. You know what you could build with uranium. So, processed differently, it turns into yellow cake. And yellow cake was shipped out of the country, according to that New York Times article. So, the notion that Democrats are these hawks protecting us from Putin, they have the 11th or 12th ranked economy in the world, Russia. They're not going to invade anybody. But, fact box, France's on and off relations with NATO. Okay, not a bordering nation, that's another story. But the notion that they're going to take over Europe like they could have with the USSR, that's not happening. We fund, 22% of NATO. This is according to CNN, but I'll read you this. They're hypocrites. So when Macron or Trudeau, when they talk about Trump, they conveniently forget that France, when it suited them, left NATO. So here, Reuters, French President Nicolas Sarkozy, this is years back, but said on Wednesday that France will rejoin NATO's integrated command structure more than 40 years after the then President Charles de Gaulle pulled out of the inner circle. They spent 40 years outside of NATO's integrated command structure, which meant that they were like us. Nobody is going to direct American soldiers to do anything. No, we're part of NATO's integrated command structure. It's just that nobody tells us to do anything. Nobody can command any of our soldiers. But they left. French President Nicolas Sarkozy, this is 2006, because in 1966, Charles de Gaulle left NATO's integrated command structure. No, it meant that we don't take part in any, sorry. We obviously take part in NATO interventions from a military perspective. It's a military alliance. They spent 40 years not taking part in any, or even the possibility of any military intervention or military endeavor. So they were 40 years, they were out of, in 1966 or 67, Charles de Gaulle pulled France out of NATO's integrated command structure. So the French military was not really part of the NATO alliance. Okay? Which is hilarious because we were protecting France and the UK and West Germany and Western Europe from the USSR. So this is kind of hilarious. But so Charles de Gaulle pulled out of the inner circle. Here are some of the details about France-NATO relations. The United States, Canada, and 10 Western European countries, European states signed the Washington Treaty to create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949, leaving NATO. Charles de Gaulle withdrew French forces from NATO's command in 1966 at the height of the Cold War and expelled the alliance's headquarters from Paris and Fontainebleau the next year in protest at what he saw as U.S. hegemony in Europe. Okay, France outside NATO. France, after its military withdrawal, championed the idea of more independent European defenses, particularly the idea that the then 12-nation European community should take on such a role as it developed a common foreign policy and security policy. So you have closer ties again. France attended a NATO defense meeting for the first time in 28 years in 1994, said it was ready for closer ties with the alliance, but there was no question of it rejoining the U.S.-led military wing. So Emmanuel Macron is the biggest hypocrite on the planet. His country, rightfully, by the way, I agree with Charles de Gaulle. So he was right. Charles de Gaulle was right. You don't want to be, well, President Trump is right. You don't want to be beholden to these multilateral organizations, especially when they exist primarily because of the United States military. The teeth, the NATO exists because of the United States, not because of France. Well, certainly not because of France, but not because of the UK, not because of Germany, because of the US. It was meant to counter the Warsaw Pact. So, in 1995, aircraft from... Okay, so... There's the defense, well, Nicolas Sarkozy... Emmanuel Macron and Justin Trudeau, they were making fun of Trump. And, Trudeau said something like, and this is a guy who is a hypocrite himself. Trudeau, very, very, very offensive pictures he's seen. And this is years and years of these pictures. Very offensive pictures. And he's the person who is like the Mr. Politically Correct. But Trump abruptly cancels NATO news conference after summit turns sour. President Donald Trump on Wednesday abruptly canceled a news conference that was scheduled to cap a contentious trip to the UK for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The presser was scheduled to come after a series of bilateral meetings with NATO members. Okay, hours before it was set to start, video emerged of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau caught on a hot mic apparently mocking Trump. Okay, if there's anyone who shouldn't be trying to disparage or mock another person, it's Justin Trudeau. He's like a walking, living meme. I know one person. Even people on the left from Canada don't even like Justin Trudeau. So, or let's say independents who are left leaning. But you know now why President Trump was set up and framed by Comey, Strzok, McCabe, Clapper, and Christopher Steele. And you know why British intelligence and other intelligence agencies worked with Comey, Strzok, McCabe, and Clapper. All of those countries combined don't have the budget that we spend for the military, which I think we should reduce our budget, but we should actually reduce our budget by withdrawing Americans. That's what Trump is trying to do. He wants to withdraw Americans from regions of conflict. And they say, well, you can't withdraw you Americans from this area because it'll be gifted to the Russians. Good, have it, enjoy it, have it. And Bill Maher with his, $30 or $40 million in his show, and he's a great comedian, but he says things like, I remember when we didn't gift countries to the Russians. You know what? Why don't you go and fly there and go and fight for the country that you think we're gifting, or fight to keep or stay in a region where two opposing factions are trying to go at it. The United States military is not a chess piece. It's not we're not a pawn to keep two actors away from one another. But I'm kind of speaking in roundabout terms because there's YouTube policies. You bring up certain words, it's a game over. Big problem. But foreign policy, in terms of foreign policy, Democrats, they don't care if Americans are, fighting forever. They don't care. President Trump does. That's how you go from Bernie Sanders to Jill Stein to President Trump. The biggest issue for a lot of people, especially me, has been to remove the United States from counterinsurgency conflicts and from endless interventions, and from a hawkish and a militant foreign policy. And I want the antithesis of Max Boot and Bill Kristol in terms of foreign policy. And so when you hear Justin Trudeau try to disparage Trump, it's like NATO exists because we fund a much greater percentage of NATO than anyone else. Our military is the reason China or Russia respect NATO. Okay, it's not any European country's military. It's our military. The Cold War is over. The Berlin Wall has already fallen. Russia is not going to invade Western Europe. It ain't going to happen. Okay, and if we were so worried about Russia, then there would be an investigation into Uranium One. There would be an investigation into all the money of the Clinton Foundation and why Madam Secretary didn't oppose the sale, the Uranium One deal, didn't oppose the deal. We allowed the deal as a country to go through. So they literally were able to purchase American mining territory. And the response was, well, they can't ship uranium out. Oh, yes, they did. Yellowcake uranium was shipped out. That's in the New York Times article. So the interesting thing here is that when they're caught with their pants down, they just pretend that they're the ones who are the old school hawks of the JFK type of, Cold Warriors. But that's not the case. That's not the case. Democrats are opportunists. They don't care. Like if it suited their political goals, they would have the utmost contempt for NATO. And by the way, you saw President Obama. The 80s want their foreign policy back. Now we're in the 80s again. When they get the executive and the presidency, we'll be out of the 80s again. Anytime, the McCarthy era. You saw what's going on. They're calling people comrade. We learned growing up that the McCarthy era was a really an unfortunate time in American history. They've repeated it. They have repeated it. And then they even try to twist it and say it's Trump who's repeating. They're completely out of it. And it's all for Clinton 2020. It's 14 minutes in. Come on. You got to give me props. They're the ones who blame Russia for everything. This is the McCarthy era. Just the other day, Clinton, why are you repeating Russian talking points? See, how is that a rebuttal or an argument? So if Russia likes something, that means it's bad. So if Putin, breathes and, eats food and, does normal things to exist, then we shouldn't do those things. Is that how it works? But you can sell uranium You can allow the sale of uranium to take place, not veto it, and it's okay. I mean, so anyway, I'll get into the reason that Trudeau and Macron are hypocrites, and the reason that these establishment type leaders are hypocrites on H.A. Goodman's other channel. That'll be a more fun episode or segment. But so check out H.A. Goodman's other channel right now. But you're talking about Trump and the reason that he is, and they say, like, that's, I guess, one point I tried to make. I'm kind of trying to speak in roundabout terms. Well, NATO is taking care of a major organization that's a threat that held territory and now they don't hold territory, and they're an offshoot of another organization that we were battling against. Yeah, President Obama called them the JV team. Look it up. And then the reason that they exist is because of Bush's intervention in Bush's intervention. So you say certain countries, like a issue with YouTube. So I just go H.A. Goodman's other channel. I'm more myself. But that was the thing. Bush's foreign policy created the reason that NATO is engaged in daily military activity. So you can't say, well, look what's taking place. Yeah, you know what? The failed foreign policy. 16 years of failed foreign policy. You can't just point to NATO and say, well, look what they're doing now. We need them. We need this alliance. Yeah, we need this alliance, I guess. No one's saying pull out of NATO. No one's saying, but scaling back our involvement in protecting others. That's actually, if they want to implement their foreign policy, then they should, from a military perspective, they should increase their military budgets. They don't have to rely on the U.S. And that's a good thing. President Trump is right about that. And also, if we're giving them the protection afforded by NATO, they should spend more money. But the issue is failed foreign policy led to exactly why NATO engages in daily military activity. You fix the failed foreign policy. Don't intervene. Don't remove authoritarians and pretend you're helping the people there. But anyway, give me your thoughts below. Trump is right about this also. And the establishment type says, oh my God, look what Trump is doing. No, that's exactly why he won. When Justin Trudeau says, oh my, all his advisors, their jaws just dropped, and I'll get to that in H.A. Goodman's other channel, that's why Trump won. Because he's like that. Because he's like that. Give me your thoughts below. Thank you very much. Check out H.A. Goodman's other channel.